Hey, Composing Gloves here. I'm wearing a hat, and today we're going to be talking about tuning vocals. Now, I have a series on NewTone. That's my primary pitch editor. It's what I use to tune my vocals. If you come over here, we go over to the NewTone channel, and you see that I have a whole bunch of NewTone. So I have a series where I cover this, and I'm going to put a link in the description to this series so that you can learn how to use NewTone, learn what the controls do, and at the end we actually go into advanced pitch editing mode and we begin to edit, and I believe we even create a harmony with it. So go check that out if you're curious about the ins and outs of advanced editing. It's tuning a vocal. What this is going to be is a bunch of examples of what I've done to the voice, what I started with, and how I tuned it to get what I do have. Because that used to be a big question I had, and I'm sure some of you will appreciate it. And I feel it would just be more useful for you to see more examples. And so I have a whole separate thing for the actual tuning of the vocals. So let's go ahead and jump in here. And what I have here is I have this as my final product.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go through a closed door. So buckle up and settle in, cause I'm getting down to my 8-bit jam.
All right, so I obviously have tuned this, and you can actually hear the artifacts created by it. I quite like them, actually, for what I was going for. But this is what I originally had as a take.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to go through a closed door. So buckle up and settle in, cause I'm getting down to my 8-bit jam.
So you see I'm flat and sharp, and it's really apparent that I'm out of tune. So I took this, and I put it in a new tone. Now, a quick note about NewTone is you see I have multiple NewTones. And some of them are doing different jobs. And the reason why I do this is because I used to put everything in one NewTone and edit and do what I needed to do there. But then I had mega big issues with getting back what I had previously done. So I highly recommend doing stuff in separate NewTones, and even naming them. So NewTone Vox 1. Vox 1. Right, so I'm like, okay, this is vocal 1 or whatever. You come up with some sort of a naming system and name them. That way, when you want to go back and change something, you can. Super, super useful when you're writing harmony parts. And I stick to it because I've been screwed over too many times by not doing it. But you see, I'm out of tune slightly, and this is a really basic fix. So I covered this in the other series, but we'll go ahead and take a quick look at it right now. So I opened it up in here, and this is the same vocal.
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but I don't want to.
And you see, I have quantized it. Now, some of these things are going to require a little bit of finesse. But what we have here is I've dropped it in, and I've centered the pitch. So originally,
I've seen that look in your eyes before, but
now it's still pretty solid, but the pitch, I was actually pretty close on the pitch. I center them, and some notes will be quantized to the wrong note. If you're closer to the wrong note than the correct note, it's going to quantize you to the wrong note. And so you've got to go through and listen and fix all those sorts of things. And then you come in here, you double click. And we cover this all in the other series, but you get it. And one of the things you want to watch out for is the amount of variation in your voice. So if I take this down, you can see I get the variation, all this stuff in the middle, which is going to cause me to sound flat or sharp.
But I don't want to go through a closed door.
And also I'm going to be sounding like that. So I got rid of quite a bit of it, but I left a little in. The more you leave in, the more natural it tends to sound.
Your eyes before, but I
didn't want to sound that natural. The other thing you want to be aware of in the advanced editing mode is these bends. So if I do something like this,
your eyes before, but
this is actually pretty solid. Let's go to another example because that's not as responsive. So let's go over here. This would be a good one. And let's make the pitch. This is the ramp, so we'll ramp it. So that runs in versus versus N, just starting there. So those are stylistic decisions you can make. So when you're tuning a vocal, you're doing more than just getting it in tune. You're messing with the performance as well and getting it to really sparkle, really be nailed right on. And you can adjust the length and stuff. We cover all those things. So this is really a pretty easy fix. I just needed to do a couple of things. And viola, I had something that I could then mix into my track. And I fixed a whole bunch of little problems. Again, I recommend tracking your vocals dry. That way, because if you try doing this with reverb, it's going to sound all funny because you're going to have reverb trying to be pitched with it. It's going to sound weird. I'll actually show you an example. So that's the first example of tuning a vocal. Now, if we come over here, you'll also notice that I have a moment that does this.
When you dance, don't dance another's 8-bit jam.
And you might be going, what's going on? Well, I have this.
When you dance, don't dance another's 8-bit jam.
And this.
When you dance, don't dance another's 8-bit jam.
And this.
When you dance, don't dance another's 8-bit jam.
And when you put them all together.
When you dance, don't dance another's 8-bit jam.
And what did I do to get that? Well, all I did was I went into NewTone, I believe it was actually this one, and I grabbed the last phrase that I wanted and I tuned them to different octaves. Then I exported that and I simply panned them differently. And that was it. That's all I had to do. And so that's the first example. Let's go ahead and hop into one that involves some vocoders. We'll get a little more complicated, but because we're going to be involving vocoders, I'm not going to be explaining vocoders, but we're going to be looking at the implication of tuning for them. And there's two sorts of schools of thought on it that I'm aware of. Then after this, we are also going to look at a much more complicated example. So, okay, here we are. We are good to go. And what we have here is we have this.
I reflect on my life, I reflect on the strife, I reflect on the ride, I reflect on my mind, I don't regret anything that caused myself to sing that.
So if we separate the voice from all this is called I Reflect, and the singer's name is Madison Scott. And she's a really awesome person. So here we go.
I reflect on my life, I reflect on the strife, I reflect on the ride, I reflect.
So I really dug this, like the way we did this. What was our original source of material? Good question. Let's find it. Okay, so here I've got the original, and this guy, or I guess this girl, was, I believe, I can't remember if I comped it or not, but comping is when you take a whole bunch of takes and you put together the best parts of each take. And I knew I was going to be running this through a vocoder, but a lot of this sound actually is because of the vocoder. So if we come in here and turn off the vocoder,
I reflect on my life, I reflect on the strife.
so the vocoder plays a pretty big role. And you can also hear that reverb that I warned you about being tuned all over the place.
I reflect on my life, I reflect on the strife, I reflect on.
So you're going wow, 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 like down there in the background. And that is a result of, again, tracking with reverb. The reverb was on the vocal track, and I just did that, and I didn't mean to do that. That's just something I accidentally did, and I decided to run with it. So this is the original, though.
I reflect on my life, I reflect on the strife.
So you see she's got some vibrato and things, and I quite like that. And I want to preserve some of those, like that kind of a thing. So what I went ahead and did was, if we come in here to the NewTone, here it is. Here's the vocal. And you see that I've, again, centered the pitch, and I've brought the variation down. If we zoom in, it's easier to see. So there's the variation, but it's still there. I wanted to keep it. I didn't bring it down too much. And the reason is there's two. Now, when you're getting ready to go into a vocoder, you can do two things. A vocoder is basically sort of like a frequency quantizer. It's more complicated than that. We'll talk about vocoders later. But what it is you send this stuff into a vocoder, and the vocoder is going to basically change the frequency content. So you can either give it some very consistent, straightforward content, or you can give it a lot of variation and then see what comes out. You may get a timbral change that you quite like. And so I tend to go the first route and keep it something sort of more consistent, but I kept some of the variation in there. So that is what's happening here.
I reflect on my life.
And now let's turn off the vocoder so we can hear exactly what's going on.
I reflect on the strife, I reflect on the ride, I reflect.
Now you notice that I didn't bother tuning some of these notes that actually sound kind of wrong, and you can also hear the reverb much more easily
I
now.
reflect on my life, I reflect on the strife,
So you hear it being whoa. I find that hilarious, sort of. So yeah, that's all I did to this vocal. And after that, it goes, I bounce that, and you notice that some of those notes are like, oh, those notes sound wrong. Well, it's going to go through a vocoder, so I don't care. It's going to be interesting to see what the vocoder does with them. If I don't like what the vocoder does, maybe I like what it does to another note. Well, then guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to come in here, I'm going to go into NewTone, and I'm going to change a bunch of notes to be the notes that I like the response of. It's really great. I have a lot of power, so I can go in and do that. After that, I turned on a vocoder. Now, the vocoder in this case is called The Mouth by Native Instruments. And I'm not going to get into the details of what this does. Right now, I'm using the minor electrify, and I've actually left it on auto mode. So it's going through and going to do the notes that it thinks it should be playing. And so in this case, they pretty much all get sent to the note C. Then if we come over here, I have one other thing that's kind of cool.
I reflect.
And that's it. Now if I turn on the reactor,
I reflect.
so that's what you have right before the drop too. And this guy is, or girl, I don't know how to refer to this anymore. The audio clip That one has been also come from that one also comes from the NewTone tuning, and I just went in, I grabbed one thing, I tuned it down, and then I exported that and ran that. Now you could also, as you see here, you could mess with different pitch settings and try transposing it up or down by different amounts. And we'll look at that in another video where we talk about pitch stretching to achieve timbre results. Right now we're looking mostly at tunings rather than using pitch shifting like that. So this is basically being used as pitch shifting, but the way it does it's kind of interesting. And that's the way I tuned it. And you see that this performance actually makes it through the vocoder in a really cool sort of machine-like way. So let's go ahead and why is my mouse wheel suddenly stopped working? Let's go ahead and just play this
Reflect on the
right here and close this.
I reflect on my life, I reflect on the strife, I reflect on the ride, I reflect on my mind, I don't regret anything that caused my soul to sing, I don't regret.
Now it is a little uneven, so I could compress this. This was earlier in the day. I didn't know so much about mixing, so nowadays there are definitely moves I would do different. But you see like that, where is it? Right here. This is pretty cool.
On the ride,
On the ride, I reflect. That's cool, man. Okay, so let's go ahead and dig into another track. This one, we're getting a little more advanced now. Let's go into a track called Eternal. The singer's name is Sam Garza. I think I'm saying her last name right. All right, so this is the track Eternal. This was recorded in a library under not so great circumstances, but they were the best that I could convince her to do. Her name's Sam Garza. She's a great singer, and I hope to do more work with her in the future. And this is what we got.
Infinite begins, eternal outcomes.
Now this was way before I really started getting into audio engineering and mixing and stuff. I mean, I was pretty heftily into it, but I didn't really get mixing like I do now. So a lot of this stuff I'm gonna go through. I really want to change and fix up. But we have our tuned vocals here, and you notice there's a lot going on. We're not gonna focus on everything that's going on here because that's just too much to conquer in one video. We're just gonna look at how did I get the bass to have a starting point to even make these sort of effects. So what was the original take like? Well, glad you asked. Here it is. Oh, and there's effects. You can tell there's plenty of effects.
Infinite begins, eternal outcomes.
All right, so there's noise in the background, yada, yada, yada. We actually recorded this in a library, believe it or not. But that being put aside, the take is pretty good, even though the recording isn't that great. And that's because we were in a library and she was doing weird things with how close the mic was and stuff. So in a more ideal circumstance, which I have had her in before, now after the fact, we've gotten some really, really, really good takes. And so but I can work with this because I'm going to be filtering it a lot and I can fix some of this with EQ. So it wasn't a big deal. The big deal was just getting the actual recording. Then I tossed it into NewTone. Now, this take is pretty darn solid already. Like I was like, this is the first take I had recorded, and at least in my career up until this point, that I was like, I can use this and not tune it at all and it sound really good still. So I did that. Actually, you see that I have a lot of stuff, and some of the stuff's going into vocoders, some of it's been pitched to different things, but I do have one pitched version and it was done in here. You see I brought the center down, so that was where we were at, and so I centered it, and I believe I left the variation right where it was. I liked the amount of variation, very controlled variation. And if we play it, and this is off. That's why it's not letting me play it. Okay, let's turn those off though. Okay.
Infinite begins,
This is what it was before.
infinite begins,
So it's not that far off. It's really freaking close.
eternal outcomes.
And I don't think I had to finesse any notes, but you see the variation looks quite extreme, but it's exactly what I wanted. It sounded great. And so that's the tuning that went in. What did I do with that tuning? Well, I got a little carried away. I came in here, so let's mute this and look at the tuned version. So let's go ahead and just solo that.
Infinite begins.
So I had to deal with that noise, and I did so with Maximus and a couple other tricks. I'm not sure if I gated on this one. There's one of these. Oh, did I even do anything in this? I don't even know why this is here. Okay, but anyways, I went through and did whatever I had to do to get rid of the noise, but a large chunk of it just goes away because of the amount of stuff I'm doing with other things in my mix. So it wasn't that big of a deal to me. Some people make a big deal like, oh, it's going to make a big difference in the end, la, 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 especially after you stack it several times. They're kind of right. But, you know, I worked with what I had, and because I'm going through a vocoder and stuff, it's not too big of a problem. So, like, if I were to turn it on and listen to it all together, I just go, I don't hear a problem. And they probably wouldn't, those people who would criticize this would only be able to do so because they're hearing this part. If they were listening just to the original track, I'm willing to bet that no one would notice.
How infinite begins. Eternal outcomes. We will.
See, and I have that riser too, so it hides some of the noise that's right there. I think it's hilarious. Okay, so anyways, this is another one that I'd like to come in and clean up. I'd probably give it a lot more attention to the noise. But that being aside, that's all I did for the tuning. It's really, really, really simple. I just come in there and do that. Doing small tunings like that can really help your track out. All this other stuff, I believe, is going through a vocoder. Yeah, they're all going through Reactor 5, and that's another instance of the mouth in action. So that's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.